ultimately he is in charge of them, their lives, my birth experience. I could do all the planning that I want, but it's going to go how he wants it to go.
Right.
And so that helped me to surrender and let go of my plans. I have my desires and the way that I hope for the birth to go, but I had to give it to the Lord and be okay with whatever outcome that he had for me.
Hi, I'm Kayla Heater, follower of Jesus, wife and mother of 5 children, Christian childbirth educator and doula, and your host of the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, where we share God-centered birth stories, evidence-based birth education, and our pursuit of surrendering our birth plans to God. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. I hope your week is off to a wonderful start. And I really hope that fall weather immerses us soon. It got pretty hot this weekend, which made me a little bit sad, but I think it's going to cool down just a little bit more. But guys, I'm ready for highs in the mid 60s max. That is my dream. Maybe even low 60s. That is my type of weather. But we're doing okay over here. I'm about 31 weeks pregnant now, and just inching my way towards the end here, getting my list of things checked off. The closer and closer we get at things, it seems like time is just flying by, so fast. It's going faster every week, except at night when I have heartburn, and then it seems like it's going really slowly. Anyways, I'm going to do something on here I've never done before. This is very much a Christian, Jesus-loving, Jesus-following, Christ-centered podcast. That is essentially what separates it from so many other awesome birth podcasts out there, is that we try to make sure every birth story is centered around Christ and faith and how your births affect your faith and your relationship with the Lord and everything. But instead of assuming that every single listener we have already believes in Jesus, I want to give you that opportunity to make sure that you've heard the gospel and the good news. So that's what we're going to do today. God created you. God created you and loves you deeply, and he created you to know him and to be in a relationship with him. But he's a perfect God, and we're not perfect. All of us have sinned, and we've chosen to do things our own way instead of God's way. And that sin separates us from him. The result of that sin is death, which is separation from God here on earth and eternally. But thankfully, God sent his son Jesus, who lived a perfect, sinless life, and then died on the cross for our sins. His blood was shed for us, and he rose from the dead on the 3rd day, ascended into heaven, and now through Jesus, we are forgiven and restored into that perfect, right relationship with God. And God offers us this salvation as a free gift. All he asks is that we turn from our sin and turn to him and put our faith in Jesus and profess that Jesus is our Lord and Savior. And all you have to do is profess that out loud with your mouth. Just say those things. Say that you believe in Jesus, that you recognize that you are a sinner and that he died and rose again, and that you have faith in him. Anybody can do that. So if you have never prayed that prayer before, if you have never made that decision, if you've never taken that step, I just encourage you to do that today. Okay, we're going to get into this week's episode. Now, I want to say real quick, if you did not listen to last week's episode, you need to pause this right here and go back and listen to last week's episode first, because today is the second part of a 2-part episode. So it's not going to make very much sense to you if you don't hear the first part. So go back, listen to last week's episode. We have a couple on here. Their names are Miriam and Bolt, and they live in Arizona, and they're awesome. And you'll get to know them through last week's episode. If you already listened to last week's episode and you're on the edge of your seat waiting to find out what happens in their second birth, then this episode is for you. For her second birth, Miriam realized the amount of support she truly needed, and that instead of isolating herself, surrounding herself with like-minded women was what she needed in order to be able to fully surrender to the Lord and lean on Him through the process of an unmedicated home birth. And what an incredible difference that would make, not only in her labor, but in her postpartum and in her relationship with her husband as well. Tune in today to find out exactly how it all went down. What made you want to have another baby after all of that and like go through that again? Because I can imagine between the birth itself and then between him not sleeping well and being colicky and you having all the postpartum stuff and it lasting for months and months and months, what made you want to do it again?
My answer would be because he needed a play partner. He needed a playmate. I mean, if you watched him grow and how like how he's with other people. First, I think another contribution before I finish that one, another contribution was the church that we were going at, that we're currently going at now. They have a lot of kids.
And you just
They
saw how well he interacted with those kids. He now after getting out of the baby stage, like once he got like became more mobile and started crawling and then walking, he became like the happiest kid. And he's so social, so friendly.
Freedom.
I know.
like he even goes to like when we have strangers like come to the front house, I don't know, trying to sell something or whatever, or we're selling something like from Facebook Marketplace. Our son would just be like, "Hey, like check out
He's
this random
he's
stuff."
totally comfortable with
Yeah,
unfamiliar people. He just loves being around people. So he's the happiest little kid now.
yeah.
And so just seeing how well he interacted with other kids, we just felt like he needed to have a buddy. He needed a sibling, someone to play with at home, someone to grow up and do life together with. And I'll say for me, on my part, about the same, like around the time that I was learning more about doula work and became a doula, that's around the same time that my anxiety and depression like began to lift. And I
Mm.
really feel like that is because for me, and I'm not saying this is for other people, but for me anyway, I think that was because I started to take the focus off of myself and put it on to other people. So I stopped focusing on like how miserable I felt and how much I was struggling with being a new mom and started focusing on, okay, how can I serve other women?
Oh, that's awesome.
Um,
Yeah.
I felt like that really helped me to no longer, yeah, to feel so depressed and to feel so bad for myself, like have pity for myself essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
So you got into doula work.
yes,
What prompted that? Since you didn't have a doula yourself, so like
I did not.
what prompted you to become one?
A couple of things. One, we went to church with the doula, the church that we had started going to. A couple months after my son was born, there was a doula who went there. And so she was there to like talk about her job and birth work and like how she became a doula and whatnot. And I eventually learned that she herself also had a free birth with her last baby, which was like so shocking to me because I had only met one other person who had had a free birth. And so I was very excited to meet her and talk with her about that. But I think a big part of me wanting to become a doula was having such a challenging birth myself and recognizing that like I did need support and I needed a lot more than I thought I would. Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't think that I would need a whole lot of support. I had the mindset that I could do it by myself and I didn't need anybody or anything to get through labor. And I was very much humbled through the experience in that regard. And so I wanted to be there to support moms and help them get through labor and also just be like a source of like emotional support and comfort for when things don't go the way that they had hoped and planned and be there to help like mitigate any like potential traumatic experience. And that's not to say that I think like being a doula, I can prevent trauma. I know for certain that's not the case. I've attended my fair share of births where moms do experience things that they would consider traumatic, but I think it helps to have a doula there to help process what is going on and to still feel supported even when something unexpected and unwanted is happening.
So you started doulaing then in between these two babies, in
Correct.
between babies 1 and 2. Okay.
Yes.
So you decide Shalom needs a playmate
Yes.
and your church is crawling with children. And
Very much
and
so.
he's such a happy kid now. He's running around. So let's get into story number 2.
Okay. So we decided probably when Shalom was like 10 or 11 months old that we wanted to like consider trying to have another baby soon. And I think about a month before his first birthday, I felt convicted that we shouldn't be preventing anymore and that we should just trust the Lord with his timing. And so we stopped preventing. And I was like really excited to be, intentionally trying to get pregnant this time since the last time was not a planned pregnancy. Still wanted and loved very much so, but not expected.
I've had a
It
couple of
was,
those. I get that.
yeah. It was exciting to try to have a baby. So we did that. I think it took us like 4 to 5 months to get
Yeah.
pregnant, which I was not anticipating considering I got pregnant unexpectedly with my son. I thought it would be a lot faster. And so I remember feeling discouraged as the months were going on. And like looking back, it was pretty dramatic of me considering there are many moms who go years even trying to conceive. But I did feel discouraged towards the end. But looking back, I'm glad that it took the amount of time that it did because I don't think I would have handled having two so close in age. If we had gotten pregnant when we started trying, we would have had a baby in like January or February of this year, like just after he was like a year and a half. And I think that would have been hard because that was kind of a tricky age for him where he started to show some like more defiance and started to recognize that he is his own person and he can defy the rules. And so he's like exploring everything and starting to like say no and throw his little tantrums. And I think it would have been a little stressful to introduce a new baby at that time. So I am glad that like God made us wait to conceive Eden. But yeah, anyways, beginning of September of last year is when we found out we were pregnant with her. It was very exciting. Like I said, I was feeling so discouraged. So I had that mindset like when I took the test, it was gonna be negative again because I was testing every month. And we were coming home from church, and I was like, I told him, I'm like, I'm never gonna get pregnant again. Very dramatic, I know. It's like, I'm never gonna get pregnant. We're never gonna have another baby. And I went home and took a test, and it was positive. It was very clearly positive, and I was shocked. I was not expecting that. I was totally expecting it to be negative again. And I was so happy. I immediately like prayed in that moment and thanked God for allowing us to be pregnant with another baby. And then I went to the garage and got him. He was out in the garage with our son. And I said, Sweetie, come here. And he ran, or he didn't run, I guess.
Right.
I kind of ran to the bathroom, but he walked to the bathroom. And I didn't even say anything. He just saw what was on the counter and said, You're pregnant. And he was very, very happy, which was it was such a joy just
Yeah.
having a positive experience, like learning that we're pregnant this time and being able to enjoy that. Yeah. You want to add anything, sweetie?
No. Yeah, it was just I saw the little stick on the bathroom sink. I was like, obviously, I was just like, she's not gonna show me be happy and show me a negative test. So I didn't even look at the
Right.
stick. I was like, oh, you're pregnant, and yeah, that was a really blessing moment. And again, thank the Lord for just giving us another child in our family. Yeah, it was awesome.
I want to add one thing. Going into deciding to have another baby, we had to come to terms with the fact that I may get HG again, just knowing
Yes.
that the recurrence rate was so high. And
That's
so,
all I'm thinking right now.
yeah,
I'm like, okay, when do you start throwing up?
I know. We had like come to peace with that, and we're like, okay, like the Lord is going to sustain us if I am very sick again. Because basically all I did for the first 5 months of my pregnancy was lay in bed. When I wasn't working, I was at home laying in bed, and he was doing like all the cooking and the cleaning. everything else because I couldn't function. Like if I got up to sweep our little studio, which was like a whole 300 square feet, like I was exhausted, totally depleted for the rest of the day. So we had to come to terms with like that may happen. And at the time I was, and I still am, staying at home with our children and caring for them while he's at work. And so we knew that that would be a lot on me. And so I would basically just do that and that alone, and like he would do everything else. So we had a plan in place just in case I had HD again. But praise the Lord, I did not. I just
Whoa.
had regular morning sickness, which was fantastic compared to having HD.
Right.
Yeah, so that was like the first of many blessings in like her pregnancy and birth. I did have, like I said, I did have some normal morning sickness. But I maybe threw up like less than 10 times the whole pregnancy.
Wow.
It was incredible. And my nausea was completely gone by the time I got into the second trimester.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
That is something to be excited
It
for.
was. It was amazing. Such a blessing. And it was such a peaceful pregnancy too. I didn't really have a whole lot of anxiety, especially in the first trimester. Now, once my nausea lifted, I got into the second trimester and I felt fantastic. I finally got to experience what it's like to like be in like the comfy,
The good
wonderful,
part.
good part of pregnancy because I never felt that way with my son because I felt so sick and then got to the point where I was so big that I was uncomfortable. So I was really enjoying the second trimester. We did have, at that point, I had had like no prenatal care. I was choosing to work with a monitress or a traditional midwife who is not licensed. Same woman who's also a doula at our church. She's currently working towards her CPM, which is amazing. Um,
Oh, cool.
yeah, but I was working with her and we had had a couple prenatal visits at that point, but I hadn't really had her do anything because I didn't feel like it was necessary. Whenever I was feeling unwell, I would just use like our blood pressure cuff to make sure my blood pressure was fine. I remember there was one time I felt like I was going to pass out, and so I did check my blood pressure and it was normal. So I don't know what that was, but all was well. But it was a pretty uneventful pregnancy overall.
So, was the idea of hiring this traditional midwife because we know that you wanted to birth at home, but I mean, last time you didn't hire anybody. So, was it to sort of have that extra layer of support and of like having another female there supporting you through the process?
Very much so. Yeah, and at the beginning of the pregnancy, I only wanted her to do like doula work and just be an emotional and physical support. I didn't want anything medical. Part of the birth, I was still intending to have like as close to free birth as possible, but like over the course of my pregnancy, I just decided that I felt more comfortable with her having her medical equipment there. And so she did wind up having that at the birth, but still we didn't really use it because it wasn't needed. And we didn't really do much throughout the pregnancy either. Like I never took any like urine tests. She never checked my blood pressure. I did have her use her Doppler a couple of times to listen to her heart rate, and I did have her check her positioning pretty frequently at the end of pregnancy. Like anytime we had a visit, she would check her position. But that's really about the extent of my prenatal care with her. We did decide to get an anatomy scan again, just to ensure that, she was healthy and there wasn't anything majorly concerning that would require a hospital birth. Um, and at that time, we also decided to not find out the gender, which was very exciting.
Oh,
And I so enjoyed that. I would totally do it again. Actually, we are going to do that again for our future kids. Have a surprise gender. That was a lot of fun. Um, so we did have an anatomy scan, and at that scan, she was breech. And I was like, oh, it's so cute. Like, I know that's so normal. Like, she still has so much time to flip. And I just called her my like little breech baby. And I was just like on cloud nine. I was so happy with her and everything was smooth. It was such a peaceful pregnancy up to that point. And then a few weeks after that, I had learned of a baby in our community passing away in childbirth. And it was a breech baby. It was an intended home birth, and the parents didn't know that the baby was breech. In fact, the day before they had the baby, they had had an ultrasound that confirmed that the baby was head down. And so, sometime between then and when the mom went into labor, the baby had flipped. But nothing that the family and the birth team tried to do at the home helped to get the baby out. they called EMS, they went to the hospital, and even the OBs like spent, I think, 15 to 20 minutes trying to get the baby out, and they were not able to get the baby out alive. And unfortunately, like the baby passed during that time. And they believe that like his head was like trapped essentially. Like the mom wasn't fully dilated when the feet and the butt had been born. And so the head was stuck.
Oh, so the body had been born for a significantly long period of time before the head could come out.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So was this somebody who went to your church or somebody who you just like knew? Or was it just like you heard from a friend of a friend of a friend, like that this happened in your city? Or like how close were you to this person? Whether you are pregnant with your first baby or wanting to have a different birth experience for a subsequent delivery, this is the fully comprehensive Christian childbirth course for you, the Surrendered Birth Course. With over 10 years of experience as a childbirth educator, a birth doula, and having had 5 kids myself, almost 6, I have created a course fit for every mama out there who wishes to be fully informed on all things pregnancy, labor, birth, postpartum, and breastfeeding, while remembering to keep Jesus at the center of it all. Our God created a beautiful design for birth, something to look forward to, and not something to be feared. Not only will this course get you prepared for your birth, but it will also get you excited for it. It will answer questions you never knew you had and teach you things you didn't realize were so incredibly valuable and central to the entire birthing process. I've had numerous couples on their second, third, or even fourth babies who've taken this course and said how incredibly glad they were and that they learned so much more than they ever thought they would. With over 12 hours of video content, 5 modules, numerous lessons, detailed PDF printout notes, and endless resources, we dive deep into pregnancy, labor, the risks and benefits of interventions, inductions, immediate and extended postpartum for both mom and baby, everything you need to know about breastfeeding, and basic newborn care. This course covers everything. Once you've taken the course, I am available to you for any questions you might have during a monthly live Q&A Zoom call exclusive to our online course audience, as well as through email. The course is on demand, so as soon as you purchase it, you'll be able to start right away and re-watch any lessons as many times as you need. Whether you are planning a medicated hospital birth or an unmedicated birth at a birth center or home birth, this course will prepare you in every way that you can be prepared. While I understand the desire to take a specific hospital or home birth course catered to your specific birth plans, birth doesn't always go how we plan. And having the knowledge of how birth can go in other environments outside of our plans is essential. Most importantly, I will help you to surrender these plans to God. And in return, the Holy Spirit will provide you with the peace that only He can give. For more information on the course, to read testimonials of others who have taken it, or to sign up for the course, just click the link in the show notes. And lastly, remember, just like we say here every week on the podcast, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands.
I did not know the person myself, but their doula is part of our church group chat. Like we go to a small enough church where the whole church can be in a group chat. And so
Wow.
they were supporting the birth, and when they realized like something was like not going right, they asked for prayers. And this was like the middle of the night, so I wasn't seeing this in real time, but I woke up to the messages, like seeing where she was asking for prayers, saying that like the baby was stuck and that they were transferring. and then seeing the message stating that like the baby didn't make it. So I woke up and saw that the next morning. And that was very, well, one, I was like deeply saddened for the family and just like being pregnant myself and having a child, just knowing like, or imagining how heartbreaking it is to lose a baby. So I was very, very upset about that. But also, I was suddenly like racked with anxiety because my baby was breech. And I was now afraid of my baby dying in a breech birth. But I also know, especially as a doula and having listened to so many birth stories before, that breech birth can happen safely and it has happened safely many times. So I have these like two conflicting thoughts in my mind that I'm trying to reckon with, and reckoning with the idea of my baby potentially dying or passing in pregnancy or childbirth. Like the rest of the day, I was just listening to the song Christ, Our Hope in Life and Death. And I'm like, really, this is my only comfort right now is that we have Jesus Christ no matter what happens, whether our baby lives or dies. But the anxiety that I felt continued on for probably another like 6 weeks or something like that, just like day in and day out. I was stressing about her position and wanting her to be head down so there wasn't the potential to experience like a death in breech birth if that were to happen.
Yeah.
I think around that time is when I also started listening to your podcast along with another Christian podcast, which I had kind of like sworn off birth podcast at that point because I was so,
Jaded
I don't
from
know.
the Free Birth
I
Society
was.
one.
I was. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm not going to listen to them again. I have no desire to. And then somebody sent me uh, a Christian birth podcast, the Holy Wild Birth podcast. And so I started listening to that one. And then someone sent me yours, and I started listening to this one. But both of those podcasts, yours and the other one, really encouraged me in a lot of ways. But one of them is to just like fully trust the Lord and surrender my baby and my birth to him and just recognize that my children don't belong to me. They belong to him, and he can do whatever he would please with my children, even if that means that he takes them home and they're not mine to raise or to carry for the duration of the pregnancy. My doula, Ashley, was also very encouraging during that time. She reminded me that it's not just, this isn't going to sound very encouraging when I say it, but it's not just breech births where babies can potentially die. It's, all births, all types of births. So there is risk with any birth. So why should I just fear breech birth? Like, why wouldn't I also be afraid of birthing other ways? And that's not the point that she was trying to make, that I should be afraid, but that I should not be afraid of delivering a breech baby just because we heard of one in our community who had passed. I shouldn't be any more afraid of that than birthing another way. And really, I shouldn't be afraid at all. And Ashley is also a Christian and was very encouraging of me to trust in the Lord and to pray and surrender my worries and concerns to Him um, during that time, which was
Yeah.
very hard to do, by the way. It's very much so easier said than done to surrender anxiety like that, especially when it's anxiety about one of your children dying. But I did feel like I was more at peace over time with whatever position that she was to be born in. I knew that it would be God ordained and that He is the one who gets to choose her position and choose how her birth pans out. And that I have, I could do all I want, but I have ultimately no control over those types of things. I don't have any control over her position. It doesn't matter how many forward leaning inversions I do or sideline releases or whatever. He is the one who gets to choose what position that she is in. And so I just had to fully trust that she was going to be in the position that she needed to be for her birth.
I love that. And I'm glad that you were able to get to that place
Yes.
instead of being trapped in the enemy's plan for you, which would have been living in a constant state of fear and anxiety, which would have done absolutely nothing
Yes.
to prevent anything. Like
So unproductive. Yeah, and I had to think about, and one of my friends, Autumn, who is also a doula and who was at the birth, she had to encourage me to decide essentially like whether I wanted to like have a home birth if my baby was breech or if I wanted to go to the hospital. And I was like, well, I know I can't have a breech baby in a hospital. There's no one here in our town who delivers breech babies. So the only other option is a C-section. So I had to decide, like, do I want to go to an OB and schedule a C-section because my baby is breech, or do I want to like trust the Lord and have a home birth even if my baby is breech?
right.
So that was very helpful too. And I did come to the conclusion that I would just trust the Lord regardless of her position. And around, I think, between 28 and 30 weeks, she finally flipped, which was a relief to me. But before then, by the time we got to that point, I had already determined that I would have the baby at home even if the baby was breech, and I would just trust the Lord with it. So I was glad that I did that, like that inner work before getting to that point.
Yeah,
Because I think fears still could have risen during the birth experience if I hadn't done that work and I had that unresolved anxiety.
definitely.
So after that, things were pretty smooth sailing with the pregnancy. Third trimester was fine. It was great. You know, I still had the typical pregnancy discomforts. I still had some heartburn, but it wasn't as bad as the last pregnancy. And I was just very grateful to be pregnant. I spent a lot of time like connecting with my baby and like laying down and feeling her move and playing music for her. Throughout my pregnancy, I had been creating a worship playlist to play during the labor, and so I would play that music for her and just listen to it myself. Maybe I think like a month before her due date ish, I had a mother's blessing. And I felt a little odd planning that because I planned it for myself, and none of the other ladies in our church like have baby showers or anything like that because they all have multiple kids, and so I think they've gotten to the point where they're like, "Oh, I don't need anything. I have everything I need." And I didn't necessarily need anything either. We had all of our stuff, but I wanted to take some time to like worship the Lord with other women and pray over the birth and postpartum and just relish the pregnancy and what was left of it and thank the Lord for a healthy baby and a healthy mom myself.
Yeah.
So I had a mother's blessing and it was beautiful. All of my friends from church were there. I had some family members there as well. My doula was there, and then some of the other ladies who I had planned to be at the birth. That's another thing.
I'm like,
After,
yeah, who all was planning to be at this birth? Because it
yeah.
sounds like quite a list now. We went from
I,
nobody at your first birth.
Yes, I went from being very isolated in my first pregnancy and the birth and postpartum to like planning on being in community and doing so very intentionally. I wanted other women to be praying for the birth and I wanted them to be involved in the pregnancy, and especially like having attended births as a doula and seeing the impact that like being surrounded by other trusted women can be in birth. I also wanted that for myself, and so I hired Ashley to be my doula, and we're also good friends. So I felt very comfortable having her there in the birth space. And I also had asked a couple of other friends of mine to be there as well.
So Ashley, was she just the doula, or was she the doula / traditional midwife?
Both,
Okay, so she was like,
essentially.
what word did you use again? It started with an M.
Monitrice.
Monitrice. Yes, I've heard that before. Gotcha. So like she's there to support you. She has medical stuff just in case, but mostly there to just emotionally support you. Okay.
Yes. So she was there. So was my friend Autumn, who is also a doula. And then I had intended for my friend Jessica to be there, but unfortunately she was sick at the time that I was giving birth. So instead I had my friend
Oh,
Elizabeth there. Elizabeth is one of the ladies who goes to our church, and I had just gone to her birth as Ashley's assistant, like less than 2 months before my baby was born. So I thought it was really cool that she was also at my birth. Like I was at
oh,
her birth
that's
and she was at
cool.
mine. It was really sweet.
So what we kept talking about in the first story that you did not have any coping mechanisms, no coping
Mhm.
skills to deal with labor, that you were just convinced from that Free Birth Society podcast that your body was just going to do it and it was just going to happen, and that you didn't need help from anybody or including coping skills. So since that didn't work out so well, obviously you're having the support and you're having like this community of women come gather around you and support you and help you. But did you prepare the second go round with coping skills for labor?
I sure did. I had learned a lot as a doula too, I will say that. I wasn't completely uninformed before having my son. I'd more so say there was just pride. There was pride.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that I needed anything like that. But as I mentioned, the Lord humbled me in my birth experience, and I very much learned and prepared for this birth. Um, So I had like this cart that I had set up with all of my different tools that I could use during labor, like a birth comb, TENS unit, tennis ball, different massaging things. I had talked with my husband about different ways that he could help me. We had a rebozo. He could do counter pressure, sacral press, things like that, being in the water. But I think a big part for me, even more so than physically preparing for the birth, was mentally preparing. That was probably the biggest, and what I would see now is like the most important thing to do before preparing to give birth. And I think that listening to birth stories, particularly your podcast, helped me to mentally prepare for giving birth. A big part was recognizing that, my babies belong to the Lord and they are His first and foremost, that I just steward His babies and that ultimately He is in charge of them, their lives, my birth experience. I could do all the planning that I want, but it's going to go how He wants it to go.
Right.
And so that helped me to surrender and like let go of my plans. I have my desires and the way that I hope for the birth to go, but I had to give it to the Lord and be okay with whatever outcome that He had for me.
Right.
And I also had to learn how to like physically surrender during the contractions and not tense up because that was such a big struggle in my first labor was tensing up during the contractions and being afraid of them. And so I had been practicing throughout my pregnancy, like how to relax my body while certain parts of my body are tense. So like, let's say I'm like driving down the road and I'm like turning or whatever. So my arms and my shoulders are tense because I'm driving, but I was practicing relaxing like the rest of my body. That's like one of like the small physical things that I did to prepare for labor. But yeah, it was mainly mental prep, mainly mentally surrendering to the Lord and reminding myself that like he is the one who's going to give me the strength to birth my child. He is the one who's going to sustain me, and I just need to let go and let him help me.
Yeah.
No, it was just a better pregnancy. And then yeah, you weren't throwing up as last time. You were just a lot more happier with this pregnancy, a lot more at peace.
Not having HG will do that for you.
Yeah, yeah, that was a big deal. And also just I think where we live at now, like our environment, is like the last pregnancy, we're yeah in a 300-foot square studio without any like plumbing or anything like that. We had to go to another home to use the restroom and sink and all that. And so now with a house, yeah, I mean, it felt like a luxury
Yeah,
in a sense. So that
I
was
bet.
another key thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm ready to go talk about the labor.
Yeah.
I want to bring up one thing before we jump into the birth story. At my mother's blessing, like I mentioned, we had prayed over the birth of the baby, and there were specific things that I wanted to pray over. And I had kind of struggled like going back and forth, like whether I was going to pray over specific things because there was like a part of me that felt like it was too much to ask for specific things, and that I wasn't like fully surrendering to the Lord if I wanted specific things to be answered. But I ultimately decided to pray about those things. And I wrote them all down and continued to pray about them during my pregnancy. And if you wouldn't mind, I would like to read them off just so that as I tell the story, you can see how God chooses to answer
Yeah.
our prayers. There's quite a few of them. I pray for a beautiful, peaceful, and redemptive home birth that is free from trauma and disappointment. I pray for full trust and surrender to God and His design for childbirth. I pray this labor will begin and end within the same day and would be significantly shorter than my first. I pray that I will go into labor well rested and nourished. I pray that Shalom will adjust to becoming a big brother well and would not experience major regressions. I pray that this would be a Christ centered, God honoring birth and postpartum experience. I pray for strength and wisdom for my birth team. I pray the baby would be in optimal position upon labor beginning and that I would not experience back labor this time.
Mm.
I pray for increased strength and closeness in my marriage and against any division and challenges that may arise. I pray my waters won't release until towards the end of labor. I pray for wisdom and dependence on the Lord as I learn to mother two children. I pray for a joy-filled postpartum free from anxiety and depression. And I pray for health and safety of both myself and the baby during labor, birth, and the postpartum period.
Mm. I think those are great prayers.
So we prayed over those in particular at the mother's blessing. Each woman like went around, like we passed around the cards, and each woman prayed over one at a time, and that was a very sweet moment. I actually recorded them praying so I could go back and listen to it again.
Mm.
And I continued to pray over these until the birth, and clearly still have them. They're like little testimonies to me now. So the birth. The birth actually starts a little bit before her birth because this time I had prodromal labor.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
was not expecting that. I knew it happens to other moms. I know it's more common with subsequent babies, but was totally caught off guard when I had prodromal labor. Um, so it was Mother's Day. It was, what was that, May 11th or something like that? Mother's Day, May 11th of this year. What we went out to breakfast, had
Yeah.
some yummy crepes, and after eating breakfast and heading home, I started to feel a little crampy. I was like, oh, this is odd. I'm just like a little uncomfortable and crampy right now. And that went on throughout the rest of the day. And they like, there was kind of somewhat of a pattern, but I was trying to not pay too much attention to it. I could feel my belly hardening and then releasing, but it wasn't the same as Braxton Hicks. And I knew how to differentiate those at that time. I hadn't slept well the night before, and so I knew like I needed to rest if this is labor. So I took a nap as best as I could. I'm a terrible napper, but thank God I was able to rest for a couple of hours that day before we went to church. We go to church in the evenings. So we headed to church, and like I mentioned, I go to the same church as my doula, and I had texted her saying like, "Hey, is this normal? Like, my belly is tightening, and it's like uncomfortable, and it feels like cramps in my lower abdomen. Do you think that it could just be because she's dropping?" And she's like, "No, Miriam, it sounds like early labor." And I was like, "No, it's not early labor. Like, we're not doing that right now." And I was so reluctant to go into labor at that time because part of it was that I was still working. Like the last time, I did not want to have to transfer my cases over to someone else sooner than I needed to. And so I wanted to finish out my cases on my own. And I also wanted to celebrate our wedding anniversary because it was on May 15th. That is our wedding anniversary. And this was May 11th. And we had intended to celebrate it on May 13th. He had already taken that day off of work months ago, and we were going to go play some amateur golf and have yummy breakfast and some other things. What we wound up getting mani pedis, like not mani pedis, just a pedicure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I was really reluctant to going into labor at that point in time. I did not want to. But when we were at church, Ashley and some of the other ladies there were like, "Oh, this is so exciting. Like, you could be going into labor." And I was like, "Nope, it's not happening." And Ashley was like, "Okay, well, like, tell me whenever you're feeling a sensation and I'll time it." And I was like, "It's nothing, but sure." And so I would like tell her when it started and when it ended. And we did that for a few times. And she's like, "Miriam, they're lasting 1 minute and they're 5 minutes apart." And I was like, "No, this isn't happening right now. Like, it's not early labor." But she was so insistent that it was. On the way home that night, things like were picking up a little bit in the car. And I was like, "Oh, maybe this is early labor." Like, it was getting more uncomfortable and they were getting stronger and more noticeable. So I got home and I took a warm bath and I went to bed. And as I was like laying down to go to sleep, they kind of fizzled out. And I was like, "Well, what was that?" Part of me was like, "Well, that's kind of disappointing." And then the other part of me was like, "Okay, well, I didn't want to go into labor anyways."
Relief.
I know. So I went to sleep and woke up the next morning, and nothing exciting had happened overnight. Nothing really happened all day. I did have some Braxton Hicks, so I felt the tightening, but it was
Not
um
really crampy.
it was there was no cramping. There was no pain in my lower abdomen. It was just my belly tightening. So I would just consider that to be Braxton Hicks versus
Yeah.
like
The
having
prodromal. Yeah.
contractions or prodromal labor. And then later that afternoon, I was supposed to be done with work with my cases by that point. But my supervisor texted me and she's like, "Hey, we don't have anybody who can meet with your client this week. Could you do it tonight?" And I was like, "I feel great. Sure, I'll do it." And so I agreed to that. And within a couple hours of saying yes, I started feeling crampy again. This time with also like feeling queasy. And I texted Ashley again and I'm like, "Hey, this is happening. Do you think it's just like prodromal labor?" And I still hadn't like really established that that was what was happening yet. I was like toying with the idea of it being prodromal labor. And she goes like, "Miriam, it could be early labor. Like you might," and she told me, she's like, "You might have actually gone into labor last night if you weren't so like mentally reluctant and resistant to going into labor." And I was like, well, I still don't want to go into labor right now because I want to go on my date tomorrow. Um, so I just kept telling myself, like, not right now, like, we're not doing this. And especially because I had agreed to go to that client visit. So I took another shower, and the cramping and the tightening and the queasiness continued, but I had to go to work. So I went to work. I was having, I guess, I don't know if I can even call them contractions. I don't know. Contractions all the way there. And then while I was meeting with the client, and then all the way back home. It was quite uncomfortable. And I wasn't timing them, but I noticed within like the last 15 minutes of my drive, I had four of them. So they were coming pretty regularly and they're like relatively close together. But I got home and I decided to take another bath to see if they would go away again. And they did not like stop at all in the bathtub. But by the time I crawled in bed, they had stopped. And I was happy about that because it meant that we could go on our date the next day. And I had told myself, I'm like, okay, all I have to do is make it through this date and then I can go into labor. Then I'll be totally ready and willing for labor to begin. So I wake up the next morning and nothing exciting happened overnight, which I was very thankful for. We went on our date to celebrate our third wedding anniversary, and it was lovely, and I so enjoyed our time together. And then by the time we went to pick up our son, about 2 o'clock, I was like, okay, I'm ready. Like, I can go into labor anytime now. And like, nothing happened. And like, this was around the same time when like things had started to pick up the 2 days prior. And so I was like, why is it not happening? I was like fully expecting to go into labor that evening, especially with in my previous birth, having gone into labor like 8 hours after getting all my paperwork done. Like, I'm a firm believer that like mom's mentality can affect when she goes into labor.
Oh, absolutely.
So, anyways, we met with Ashley that night. I had actually already scheduled an appointment to meet with her before I had prodromal labor, and it was so needed that evening because by the time that evening rolled around and I wasn't having any contractions anymore, I had felt discouraged, which was so
Right. Now you're
unusual.
frustrated.
I know, I was frustrated, and I didn't expect that because I had hoped and prayed like from the middle of the pregnancy that I wouldn't even go into labor until like on my due date or after my due date. Like I wanted to have a late baby because last time I didn't have any time to rest or just enjoy the end of my pregnancy without the stress of work. And I so wanted that this time. And I also wanted a little more time to just enjoy being with my son and enjoy being with my husband before, we welcome a new baby into the family because I know what a big change it brings to have a baby.
Yeah.
And so I was totally fine with going past my due date. But that did not happen. um, I don't think I mentioned, but she was due May 21st. So this was still like over a week before.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Over a week before she was due. Anyways, I met with Ashley that night and I talked with her. I shared my concerns with her. I still had some lingering like fears from my previous birth that had been cropping up throughout the pregnancy, just fears about like not progressing quickly, or at all. Like I still had doubt in my body's ability to like birth a baby without medical intervention,
Yeah.
just because it was like over 32 hours of labor like outside of the hospital and I hadn't gotten any further than 1 centimeter. So I was worried about that. I wasn't really worried about her position anymore, although she was head down. But my biggest concern was my body being able to make progress in, I guess, a timely manner. I was also worried about like laboring overnight again or having a multi-day labor and just getting too exhausted to birth at home and having to transfer for an epidural again.
Yeah.
So we talked about all those things. We talked about, just surrendering it all to the Lord and letting like her be born in his timing, especially because I was so antsy and anxious now about wanting her to be born because the prodromal labor is playing tricks on me. And yeah, we identified like a couple things that I could look forward to help distract me from like when she would be
Still
born, help
being
me get my
pregnant.
mind off of it. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was helpful, and I really appreciated that conversation. So afterwards, we went home, got our son ready for bed, and got ourselves ready for bed. We stayed up talking a little bit, maybe till like 10 o'clock, and then we went to sleep. And I woke up the next morning at about 2:30 a.m. and I was having this tightening sensation from like hip to hip in my lower abdomen, and it was like a little painful, and it felt different than the prodromal labor, and I immediately knew that I was in labor. And I was like, of course, Lord. Like I wouldn't go into labor until the next day because I had prayed that I would go into labor well rested. So of course, like knowing that he wanted to answer that prayer for me and like give me a few hours of sleep, of course he wouldn't have let me go into labor the night before because I wouldn't have been well rested. I would have been laboring throughout the night again, which was a fear of mine. So I thought that was interesting that I had like so wanted to be in labor that evening, but
But you
that
would
was
have been
not the Lord's
rested.
plan for us. That
Right.
was not the Lord's plan for us, and it wound up being a blessing. But anyways, I realized, like, I just knew, even though it was very mild, I knew that they were real contractions and that I was actually in labor this time. It just felt different. And I don't even know how to describe that. I think I just knew.
Yeah. I
So I
know. I
tried.
know what you're talking about.
I'm glad you understand. I tried my best to go back to sleep. I had learned from last time that, like, I need to just relax and rest and conserve my energy. And so
Mm-hmm.
I tried my
Hmm.
best to go back to sleep, but I was not able to do so. I had struggled with insomnia throughout the pregnancy anyways, so like even throughout the pregnancy, like if I got up to use the restroom in the middle of the night, I'd be up for hours.
Mm.
So it's like opening my eyes and like getting on my feet would kind of disturb my ability to sleep.
Yeah.
Um, but I tried to. I tried for about an hour to go back to sleep. I played the Christian hypnobirthing
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah, because that
the
can usually
scriptures
put people
track.
to sleep really easily.
Yes. I had really enjoyed listening to the scripture track throughout my pregnancy, and I actually played it just about every single night. We would fall asleep to it, and listen to it, and it was very relaxing to me. So I put that on and I tried to go back to sleep. I was not able to do so, and about an hour had passed, and I started to feel hungry. And I debated, like, should I stay in bed or get up and eat? And I was like, okay, well, this is labor, and I need to,
Be
build up my
nourished.
strength and nourish my body and get some energy. So I got up and I ate. I remember so many specific details. I ate some cottage cheese, a beef stick, some pistachios, and then that's it, fruit bar. And I was like, okay, I've got some fats here and some protein and a little bit of sugar from the fruit. I am good to go. So I ate that and I put some liquid IV in my water. I strung up some twinkly lights in the living room so I could have some light and like start to create the
Ambiance.
warm, yes,
Yeah.
the birth atmosphere. But I noticed that when I got up and I was moving around, that the contractions became further apart. When I was in bed, they were like 7 to 8 minutes apart, and I could definitely tell that they were happening. But when I got up and moved around, they started to space out and they became less intense. Like I couldn't feel them as much. So I
Yeah.
thought that was unusual. Usually, I think it's the other way around for a lot of moms.
Yeah. Just a positioning thing, but yeah.
Yeah. So I went and got back in bed, and then things started to pick up a little more. And I laid there until his alarm went off at 5 for work. And when he woke up, I said, "Guess what?" And he was like, "What?" And I said, "I'm in labor." And that was an exciting moment.
So I assume he did not go to work.
Oh, he did.
What?
No,
Yeah.
I told him to go to work. I told him to go to work. It was still early labor. He only works like 20 minutes away from our house, so I wasn't worried about that. And I also didn't want to be like sitting around waiting for things to happen. I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to continue on about my day as normal, but in like a more restful like
Yeah.
mindset and attitude. Like I wasn't going to be going thrift shopping into Walmart like last time, but I also didn't want to like just sit and be like, all right, I'm waiting for the next contraction to happen.
Right. Because that can make labor feel like forever.
Yes, yes. So I wanted to ignore it as long as possible. So I said, nope, still go to work. I feel fine. Plus,
Good
the
strategy.
contractions were still so inconsistent and very, very mild. I didn't think it was necessary for him to stay home. And I wasn't worried about him missing the birth either with how long our first one had been.
Right.
We spent some time together as husband and wife, and then you went to work. And then shortly, no, actually a little bit, he called in late to work, like an hour late. And our son had woken up during that time. And by that time, like once our son was up, like the contractions were like next to nothing. Like I could barely feel them. They were back to being like 20 seconds long every 10 minutes. Like they had totally just like kind of really spread
Petered.
out and were starting
Yeah.
to fizzle out. And I knew that me interacting with other people and like being up and moving around at this point was not going to be very helpful. And so I had texted a friend of mine who lives near us. Most of our friends live in Tucson, so like 30, 45 minutes away. But we do have a friend who lives here in Sahuarita. And so I texted her and I'm like, hey, what are you up to today? And she's like, oh, I've got some work stuff going on. What are you at? Like, what do you need? And I was like, well, I think I'm in labor. Can you come hang out with Shalom? And she was like, yes, I'll drop everything. And so she canceled all of her work appointments that day, which I'm so grateful for.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And she came over and hung out with our son for several hours, so that I could just focus on being in labor.
Yeah.
Um, and by that time, like I knew that I had to do something. I wanted to do something to get like the ball rolling on labor because I was afraid of like early labor lasting all day and then laboring all night, and being exhausted
Mm-hmm.
again. So I had like tried walking around the block with my son and I walked for like half an hour and had two mild contractions within the half an hour. And so I said, that's not it. Like, this is not going to work. We got to try something else. So I texted my doula, Ashley, and I was like, "Hey, what do you think about me like using this homeopathy to try to get labor started?" And I cannot remember what they're called. I actually cannot even pronounce them. But they're
Oh,
these like
because they're all
little,
in Latin.
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And I might even say the brand's name incorrectly, but like the Boiron,
Mm-hmm. Bow iron.
Boiron,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Boiron. Okay, there you go. So it was those, and you're supposed to like alternate two pellets. This is not
Like
medical
every
advice for
15
any
minutes or something.
every half an hour.
Oh, yeah.
So I did that for about 2 hours, and I was very skeptical of it actually working. I
Mm-hmm.
had seen it work well for a couple of other moms that like I had teamed up with Ashley when working with when I was either the doula and she was the monitrice, or she was the monitrice and I was her assistant. I had seen that work well for some other moms, but I was skeptical of it working for myself.
So did it
Yes.
work?
Yeah, so like I said, I was skeptical. I was doubtful that it was actually going to do anything. I started taking them around 9 a.m. and by that time, my friend Amanda was here to hang out with my son, which was great. So I could like go and retreat when I needed to. So I spent a lot of time in the bathroom. And yeah, I think when I started, my contractions were still probably like 10 minutes apart, not even lasting a minute. They were just almost nothing, in my opinion. And then after half an hour, they were more like every like 8 minutes apart, maybe 45 seconds, another. And then after the first half hour, so when I started the second half hour, I was like, oh, I'm gonna do the mile circuit while I do this. So I started that too, and things continued to progress as I did both the protocol for the homeopathy and the mile circuit. And by the end of it, I was definitely having like regular strong contractions and I was beginning to vocalize. I still wouldn't classify them as painful at that point. They were just intense, but it definitely helped. And so I was really glad that I had decided to do the homeopathy protocol and that I had decided to do the mild circuit as well. I'm not sure which one helped because I did them at the same time. I'm probably probably
Maybe
leaning more
both.
on like, yeah, maybe both, or maybe it was the homeopathy. I don't know. But anyways, I was definitely feeling like I was getting closer to active labor at that point, and that was around 11 a.m. I was still like doing fine, coping with the contractions on my own. Like I said, spending a lot of time like on the toilet, like in between the like half hour marks, like in between the portions of the mile circuit and then afterwards. And I was really focusing on like dropping my shoulders, dropping my head, like opening my palms and having low sounds and just like fully leaning into it and surrendering to the sensation. And I was coping pretty well. I didn't feel like I needed a whole lot of support up to that point, and so I just continued to labor alone. And Amanda continued playing with my son, and he loves her, so they were doing great and just fine together. At one point, I went to go make myself a salmon patty because I was feeling hungry and knew that I needed some good protein. So I went and cooked that, I think, while I was doing the movement portion of the mile circuit and like was lunging up against a chair and brought the birth ball in while I was cooking the patty and eating it, and then returned back to the toilet. So around 11:30, I had like experienced this emotional release and like started crying in between my contractions. And I was really sad about like Shalom no longer being an only child. And I was sad to like say goodbye to him because he wasn't going to be there at the birth. We were going to send him off to a friend's house, because I felt like he would be a distraction to me. He's very much a mama's boy. And so I knew that he would want to be like on top of me and crawling all over me and wanting me to play with him and hold him and do this and that. And so I knew I couldn't have that in labor. I know that's for some moms, but that was not for me, at least for that birth. And so I was feeling very sad about him being a big brother and having to say goodbye to him and it kind of being like I don't know, just like a milestone for us. in a sense. So I was crying about that. And very shortly after, my friend Elizabeth, who was going to be at the birth, had texted me and she's like, "Are you doing okay? Do you need anything?" And I'm like, "I'm just fine. Like, maybe I'll call Bolt to be home soon. I don't know." And I was like texting multiple people at this point in time. So like messaging him, asking him to pray that my labor would continue to progress, and messaging Autumn and Ashley, updating them on how the labor had been going. And so I was like, oh, like, I think I'm okay, but maybe if things continue like this for another hour or two, maybe I'll call Balt to be home and then you guys can come over. And I think within like 5 minutes, I had a really strong contraction and I had vocalized more than I had at that, like any time in that later at that point. And I was like, I'm calling Balt to come home. And so I called you and I was like, sweetie, things have really picked up. You need to come home. And it was like a 10-second phone call. It was very fast. He was just like, okay, I'll be there. And he was home like half an hour later, or less than, maybe 20, 25 minutes.
And what time was that?
Around noon. Yeah, you got home around noon.
Okay.
After that, like, Amanda had been like checking on me, like coming up to the bathroom door. Are you okay? And I was like, yes, I'm doing fine. I'm great. And she was a little nervous.
She like didn't want to get stranded with you having a baby by
Oh
yourself,
gosh.
probably.
She's a mom of three teen boys and had all her babies in the hospital, and they were all traumatic births for her. And
Oh,
so she was just like, this is so, she didn't think that what we were doing was bad. She knew that we were having a home birth and was supportive of that, but it was so unusual to her and almost frightening because all that she knew was, women giving birth in the hospital and like having trauma associated with birth. And so she was like afraid for me. And she was, at one point, she was like, do you need any pain medicine? And I'm like, no, Amanda, I'm trying to do this without
without
any pain
that.
medicine.
Yeah.
So as soon as Balt got home, she was like, good luck. And she like ran out the
Bye.
door. Yeah.
That's funny.
But it's actually, I'm going to jump forward a little bit. It's actually so sweet. And I'm really glad that she got to be there for that part of my labor, because she had said afterwards that like it changed her mindset and her view of birth, because up until that point, all she knew that was like birth had to be traumatic and scary and terrible experience, and something that she, as she said, like she had to survive. She just had to survive giving birth. She had to get through it. It wasn't something to enjoy,
Enjoy.
and like it wasn't a beautiful experience for her. And she said, like, having witnessed me labor and then like seeing me so freshly postpartum with the baby and knowing that the home birth went well, it shaped her, like it reshaped her mindset on birth.
Yeah. That's so
So
good.
that was really beautiful. But anyways, back to the birth. Amanda left. You had gotten home. My contractions started to slow a little bit as like there was this commotion, and he was getting home and Amanda was leaving, and around the same time someone had come to pick up our son. And so like that guy was there to get our son. Is a friend from church. Actually, Ashley's husband. So
Oh, nice.
yes, he came and picked up Shalom, and like I had gone outside to say goodbye to Shalom, and so my contractions kind of slowed down a little bit. And I was expecting that to continue as like more people were coming into the home. And Ashley got there a little bit afterwards too. I think only like 15 or 20 minutes after Balt got home, Ashley had arrived as well. And I told her, I was like, yeah, I think I'm in active labor or getting close to it, but I think my contractions might slow down as there's this transition. And that's what I had anticipated. And I also told her, I was like, I'm really curious to know how far along I am, like dilation wise, but I didn't want to be checked because I didn't want to be discouraged if it wasn't very far. I was like, I know the number doesn't matter anyways. Like, I could go from being 1 centimeter to having my baby in 2 hours. So I don't want to know. I don't want to focus on it. I just want to continue laboring in peace.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth got there very shortly after. There was more commotion. And to my surprise, my labor did not like slow or stall. Like I continued to have regular, consistent, intense contractions. So I think that was like one of the first signs that I was for sure in active labor. And I was walking around the house and laboring wherever I wanted to at this point. I would like lean over the counter. I was definitely getting to the point where I had to like brace myself through a contraction, and not in the sense that I was tensing up, but I needed to like lean on something for support.
Yeah.
And so I was like leaning on the walls, like angling myself over. I was kind of like getting into like a semi squat position, just doing that all throughout the house. But I still didn't feel like I needed physical support. After a while, Elizabeth had got there. Autumn showed up, I think around 1. And she had brought me some boba, and I was so happy about that. I got to drink some boba in labor, but that did not last very long. I very quickly realized that I did not want anything to eat or drink. And I wasn't nauseous. I had
No
no,
appetite. Yeah.
yeah. So I continued to labor for a while, and my music was playing, my birth playlist, and everyone was getting the birth space set up. They were stringing up like the twinkly lights in a more prettier way than I had strung them up before. They were kind of a hazard, just like across the room beforehand. So they're putting that up, putting the birth affirmations up. But yes, he was like stapling curtains to our wall because we have this big window in our kitchen that just allows so much light to shine through. So he was trying to cover that up. And I was just laboring, and I wanted to be like around my birth team, but I didn't want to be watched. So I was just like going into other rooms as I pleased and like walking around and stopping when I had a contraction, vocalizing and leaning over. But yeah, it was a good experience. Like I just really enjoyed it. I just enjoyed being in labor and having my team there, and yeah, it was an enjoyable experience. And I was having no back labor at that point, which is amazing and an answer to prayer. Sometime between 1 and 2, Ashley asked me if I wanted to set up the birth pool. And I knew that I wanted it to be blown up, but I didn't know that I wanted to get in yet, like fill it with water and get in, because I was still like worried about how quickly my labor was progressing. Or I had doubts about it, I should say. I knew my labor was progressing, but I didn't think that I was close to giving birth.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, like, I don't want to get in too soon. Like, I think we should wait a little longer. And she's like, Miriam, I think you're closer than you think you are. And I was like, I don't know about that. But I eventually said that they could fill the pool because she reassured me that like they could keep the water warm by pouring more water into it and taking out cold water before pouring in the hot water, of course. And that I could also get out if labor slows when I'm in the tub. So around 2 o'clock is when I finally got in the tub. I was a little reluctant to get in because it meant that I had to take off my TENS unit. I forgot to mention that I put on the
Oh.
TENS unit probably around like 3:30, 4 in the morning. And I had it on since then and I loved it. Even though I wasn't having back labor, it was a great distraction. And just the sensation of the like a little pulses
Mm-hmm.
was enough distraction and kind of a relief to me. So I was really like depending on that and like would turn it up a lot when I was having a contraction. And so I didn't want to take it off. I was afraid that I would not cope as well once I took it off. But eventually I did. Around 2 o'clock, I took it off and I got in the tub. And to my surprise, I continued to cope well. I suppose that's probably because of the warm water. But yeah, I'm sorry, I've said a lot. Do you have
Yeah.
anything to say, sweetie?
Yeah. So like going back to when you called me, I was just like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it was like 10-second phone call. Like, yeah, I'll be back home.
You were excited.
Yeah, I was. And I was telling people like, all right, I'm leaving. My wife is in labor. Like, what? Really? Congratulations. I was like, yep, going, leaving. I drove off road, crashing through bushes. Um, went through some neighbor's yard. Back. No, but yeah, I sped. Because yeah, the way how you were talking to me, it was just not. You weren't like freaking out or anything like that. I'm like, oh, she's just like, this is the beginning. I'm gonna be like, I am gonna speed a bit, but I'm gonna get home. No rush, no stress. Got there. I see Miriam just cleaning up the house. And yeah, Miriam was going through her contractions. And at that moment, I'm like, all right, this is where I have to step in and help. And so a lot of it, not so much hip shaking this time. It was just more like hip compress.
Squeezing.
Yeah, squeezing. So at the very beginning, every time when you were going through a contraction, I would pray, preach, and read God's word to her.
Mm.
And I was just there trying to be present, have her lean on me. And Miriam also gave me a book to read to prepare. And one of the things I remember was do forehead to forehead. So that was cute.
And him not being as prepared and educated the time before was no fault of his own. I take responsibility for that because I told him that he didn't need to do anything. And obviously, we learned our lesson. I needed a lot more support than I thought. And so this time he came in fully prepared and he was very supportive and present and engaged. And when I was having contractions and in between, he was praying. He was reminding me of God's strength and of my strength. and just constantly providing like comforting touch, whether it be like letting me lean on him or like before I got in the tub, I would like sink down into his arms during the contractions, like in a semi-squatting position. So he was like kind of physically holding me up. He would massage me in between contractions. And then, yes, there did come a point where I did need hip squeezes. But that wasn't until I had been in the pool for probably about half an hour. So jumping back to when I got in the pool, was having contractions. I had kind of like deep down knew at this point I was in active labor, especially because once I got in the pool, like the contractions continued to progress in like length and intensity and like how close together they were. But I was still doubtful of my progress and like how far along I was in labor. I think part of me was worried that I would like get to a point where I was being like more dramatic than my progress like allowed for, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of me felt that I was a little dramatic in my labor with my son, you know, acting as though, and not like acting as if I'm acting in a movie, but like my actions displayed that I was in active labor and like my husband thought in transition, but really I was only 1 centimeter dilated. So I was a little nervous about progress throughout this labor too. But anyways, I labored in the tub for a while, and about half an hour after being in the tub, I started to feel an ache in my back that was only there during the contractions, not the whole time. So it was different than back labor because with the back labor, I like constantly had an ache in my back and it was a very intense ache. It felt like essentially a Charlie horse that never let up,
Mm.
which is just a miserable feeling
Yeah.
and very hard to breathe and relax through that kind of sensation. But this one was only when I was having contractions. And so, doula me, logical me is like, oh, baby is descending and starting to put like pressure on the sacrum, and that's why I'm feeling this sensation in my low back during contractions. Um, but I was still doubtful, and I expressed those doubts to my birth team, and I'm like, oh, like what if I'm not even dilating at all? What if I'm still a one? And they're like, Miriam, like I think you're like way closer to giving birth than I think you are. And Ashley had offered to listen to her heart rate to see, not necessarily out of concern for her health, but to see where it was at physically.
Right. Like where
Um,
she was in the
yes,
space. Yeah.
yes. So we listened to her heart rate, and it was like lower than it had been in my pregnancy. And so she encouraged me, like, Miriam, your baby is getting lower. Um, Shortly after I started feeling the pain in my back with each contraction, I got this like tingly sensation in my lips, which was really annoying, and I had never heard of it before, so I thought that was really unusual. And then my arms started to tingle, like when you sit on your leg too long and it kind of cuts off the blood supply and like
Mm-hmm. Falls
come like
asleep.
becomes numb. Yeah, it falls asleep. It felt like my arms were falling asleep. But that didn't make sense because they were just like floating in the water. And so these are like all signs that I was like entering transition. And I was also like I was still coping through the contractions well, but I was having a more difficult time with them. Like they were becoming more intense and becoming longer, and I was vocalizing more. And like I was thinking in my head, like, oh, this is like really hard. Like, how long is this gonna go on? And so I started to enter transition, but I was still like denying that at all. It was like, I'm not that far along. Like, what if I'm not in transition? What if I'm just being dramatic again, like last time? Um, and this isn't truly like my behavior truly is not like a representation of where I'm at physically, with dilation. My birth team was very encouraging throughout all of this, and they just kept reminding me that these are signs that my baby is getting closer. They tried to offer me like different comforts and support at this time. My husband had been doing a sacral press and hip squeezes. Yeah, Autumn had gotten like the tennis ball out to do a sacral press too, and like all like both of those together felt really nice and relieving. And so I had them continue doing that throughout contractions for a while. Eventually, it was too much to have like both the sacral press and the hip squeeze, so we just stuck with the hip squeezes. Um, they tried to give me like water and tea, and at that point I wanted absolutely nothing. Like I wouldn't even take a sip of water. It was so unappetizing to me, unappealing. My midwife tried to offer me peppermint oil. I can't do that because I'm
Because
sorry, I shouldn't say midwife, my monitrice. But yeah, because of my first pregnancy with my son, I could not sniff peppermint oil whatsoever. Um, so that didn't work. There was just not a whole lot that was like bringing comfort in that time, which again is like another sign that I was in transition. It started to feel like a lot to me, and I voiced that to my team. I said to Ashley, I'm like, it's so much, Ashley. Like, and I didn't want to say I can't do it because I knew in my head, like logically, if I said that, it would actually impact me and my belief that like I could get through having an unmedicated birth. So I didn't allow myself to say I can't do this. But I did say over and over again, like, it's just so much. This is starting to feel like a lot. But yeah, things continue to progress. I think that was around like 3 o'clock in the afternoon ish. In between contractions, I remember feeling her move, and I was like so happy that I could feel her move because I felt so disconnected from my son in my labor with him. Like I couldn't remember feeling him move at all, but in this labor I could feel her moving, and I remember mentioning like, "Oh my gosh, she's having a dance party in there," because she was moving so much, and I could still tell that she was like in a good position. For like I think the last month of my pregnancy, she had been ROA, so head down with her feet on the left side of my abdomen, which is a decent position for giving birth or for going into labor, which is exactly what I had prayed for. So I definitely could tell that she was still ROA. And I remember, like, as my labor was progressing, her feet were getting lower and lower. Like, they weren't up in my ribs anymore, and they just kept getting closer to my belly button. So that was reassuring. I eventually asked for Ashley to check the baby's heart rate again, and she did. And this time it was even lower, which was, reassuring to me. I was still having some doubts. I really could, like, had a very difficult time getting those doubts out of my head. But it was like, I don't know. It's really strange the mindset that I had, or I don't even know if I'd call it mindset, but like my presence, my mental presence. Um, when I was in labor with my son, I felt like I wasn't like fully mentally there and couldn't think logically and rationally and like say what I wanted to say when I wanted to say it. But in her labor, I like had logical, rational thoughts and could say what I wanted to say or what I needed. I could voice my opinions. And I don't know
yeah.
if that's just like a matter of feeling like I was safe enough to do that and calm enough and relaxed enough to think logically. So
And you
yeah,
had a
there
lot
was,
more energy
it is very true.
and no fentanyl in your system.
Yes. Yeah, that would make sense. So anyways, in my head, I like had this thought of like all of these things, like the doula in me was saying, like all of these things are pointing to being in transition and making progress and like being very close to meeting your baby. And then the other part of me, where the fear and anxiety was like, I could not be close at all. Like my baby may not be on her way. Um, so that was really interesting uh, to to like mentally think about when I was in labor to have those two contradicting thoughts. Um,
Yeah, like constantly back and forth.
yeah. So I think around 3:30-ish, so like less than an hour after I had entered transition, my doula monitress Ashley had suggested that I try checking myself um, to see if I had made progress because I kept having these reoccurring doubts about how far along I was and whether or not my baby was getting close to being born and whether I was making progress. And so I did, and I felt her head. And that was such a healing moment for me to be
Mm,
able to feel her head because it reassured me that my body was able to give birth and I didn't need Pitocin in order to dilate and progress. And I didn't need to be in the hospital and I didn't need all these interventions, but that God had designed my body to give birth without those things. And while they can be helpful at sometimes, they don't always need to be used. And so that was so healing for me. I cried whenever I felt her head. And I actually didn't know what I was feeling at first. I had mentioned, I'm like, oh, I feel something hard. And Ashley was like, that's probably your baby's head. And I just sobbed. I was so happy and relieved and felt like part of me was healed in that moment,
mm,
realizing that my body had made progress and she had started to descend enough for me to be able to feel her head anyways.
yeah.
But still, there was a little bit of doubt, and I wasn't sure that I was fully dilated, even though she was really low. I wasn't sure that I was fully dilated. Of course, I had no idea what 10 centimeters felt like, and it didn't feel like it was big enough to me at the time. And so I was worried that I wasn't fully dilated. Plus, there was this like circular feeling thing that was like kind of stretchy, and so I was worried that I just had like a really thin and stretchy cervix because I've heard that kind of terminology or vocabulary used for a mom who's like almost fully effaced but still has some cervix left. And so
Hmm.
that's what I was worried about. And Ashley was asking me questions about it to try to identify it. She didn't want to check my cervix unless I asked her to. She's very hands off and respectful in that regard, which I appreciated. So I was just explaining what I was feeling to her, and it wound up just being the membranes. And so I think that at
Yeah.
some point, like for me, like checking myself, I had kind of scratched open the membranes, and there was like a little hole essentially at the top where it had kind of like opened up a little bit, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So it turns out that was what I was feeling, but I wasn't confident of that until, I don't know, about 20 minutes before she was born. But I don't want to jump too far. A little bit after I had checked myself and realized that like she was descending and I was dilating, and I was making progress, things continued to get more intense as they do with labor. And I remember getting to a point where I was like thinking about transferring to the hospital for an epidural. And I did actually like walk through that process in my head. And I was like, okay, if I want to get an epidural, I'm going to have to get out of the tub and get dressed and get in the car. And we're going to have to drive 40 minutes to the hospital. And then we'll have to go to triage and they're going to have to check my cervix and like check my blood pressure and listen to the baby on the monitor, and then they'll assign us a room and we'll get over to the room and I might get an epidural pretty soon after getting into the room, or anesthesia could be in a surgery or with another mom, so it could be a while, and then you'd have to wait to get the epidural, and once we get it then there's like 20 to 30 minutes before there's even relief. So I walked through all of this in my head. I was like, it could still be like 3 or 4 hours before I even get relief, and I knew deep down that I was closer to giving birth like than that I would have my baby before then. I knew I was close enough that if I decided to transfer, we either would have had a car baby or I would have had an unmedicated hospital birth. And so it was completely pointless for me to transfer anyways. Like it was that decision was that option was long gone. It was not
Mm.
an option for us anymore. And that for me was a very humbling moment. Because I realized there was not a single thing or person on this planet who could save me from what I was about to go through. Nobody could take away the pain that I was about to experience birthing my baby, and that the only person that I could rely on was God. And that it was only through him that I was going to get through it, because by that time I felt like there was no way that I could make it through, with how intense things had gotten. So it was a very humbling moment for me. And I actually, around that same time, remembered one of the podcasts that I had listened to on your show where a mom had shared about how when she was in labor, she thought of like the cross and the weight of sin that Jesus took on and the pain and the suffering that he endured for us, and
Hmm.
how our pain is next to nothing compared to what he went through. So that actually came back to my mind while I was in labor. And I thought of that and I was like, okay, like Jesus did all of that for us. I can birth my baby in God's strength and power, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a beautiful moment for me. I didn't really voice that to anybody. I was in my own little world. And I was also amazed at like how cognizant and aware I was of things like that in labor, because I totally expected to be unable to have rational thought. I realized that the only way, literally, I had the thought the only way out is through, that
Hmm.
birth affirmation that a lot of moms will use when they're in labor. That's what I had in my mind. And I was like, yes, the only thing I can do is give birth to my baby now. Like, there's nothing else that can be done. And so I continued to labor. I would say that whole experience right there was probably like 40 minutes before she was born. So I was getting really close to the end.
Yeah.
I think maybe like 10 minutes after that, I was checking myself again and I felt this thing that felt like the size of a finger, and it concerned me. I thought it was the cord, And I knew that if it was the cord, that that would be an emergency situation. Like I would either have to birth her right then and there and just like push with all my might, or we would need to transfer to the hospital for a C-section, out of fear for cord prolapse. And so, like, being concerned about that, I had Ashley check me to make sure that it was not the cord. And it was not. It just wound up being like bulging membranes. But again, I am not a medical professional, so how should I know what that feels like?
Right.
So I was very glad to have her there and be able to check me and have the knowledge to know what she is feeling. And I also want to say, I think it's very cool that I was able to remain in the pool, and not have to get out or be on my back to be checked. I remained upright and she maneuvered to be able to check me in a position that I was comfortable in, which is what I so love about working with a traditional midwife or a midwife in general. You don't have to get on your back to be checked, among many other things. You don't have to get on your back to birth your baby. Oh, one little thing I forgot to add. My husband had hopped in the pool with me at this point, to better be able to squeeze my hips. So he was in the pool with me as well, while we were laboring. He got in shortly after I checked myself and felt her head for the first time. After Ashley had checked me and confirmed that it was not the umbilical cord and was just the membranes, bulging, I suddenly felt the urge to push, which I think is not a coincidence, because before then I had kind of like leaned into the contractions a little bit and kind of like breathed downwards in a sense. I wouldn't say I was actively pushing, but I was like sending my energy down and breathing down, and that felt good, but it didn't feel like she was really descending. And again, I was also worried about the progress that I was making. But when Ashley checked me, she also confirmed that I was definitely fully dilated and likely had been as long as I'd been checking myself, and that all I needed to do was push her out, because at that point she was very close to being born. But I felt the urge to push shortly after that, and I think it's because I finally felt safe enough and ready to push, knowing that I was fully dilated and my body was physically ready. And so I started pushing, and that was, I think, 4:30, about 4:30 in the afternoon. And I remember, well, I don't remember saying this. I watched video footage that Autumn had captured during the birth. I had said, like, my body's pushing, my body's pushing. I don't remember saying that until her head was coming out. So it's really interesting that I had said that, but don't remember it. But my body was pushing, and I was in like a more upright position at this point. I had been laying back for a while, like leaning back against my husband, but my birth team had encouraged me to get in a more upright position because they were thinking that like me leaning back, I was not utilizing gravity to its full extent to help the baby descend. And so I reluctantly eventually got up into an upright position, and that really did help as well. And I didn't push for very long, maybe like 15 minutes. And I could feel her head getting lower and lower with each contraction. And it got to a point where like her head, like I was holding my hand against my perineum and I could feel it starting to bulge, like because her head was getting so close to being born. And that was a really cool feeling. It was intense. It was painful. I could feel the burning sensation a lot sooner than before her head started to crown, which I hadn't heard other moms describe that before. I've heard the ring of fire when the baby is actually crowning, but not the burning sensation before then. So I'm not sure if that's a normal thing for moms to experience, but it was mine. So at that point, I wasn't actively pushing with my body at that point. I had earlier on in my labor, but by that point, I could feel her descending and I knew I didn't need to push. So I stopped and I just breathed through the contractions while my body pushed her down and as she descended. So I thought I still had a few more contractions at this point before her head was going to be born. But during well, I guess, yeah, my last contraction, essentially, my body started to push her out fully. And like I said, I was just breathing at this point. I knew better than to push as well or to hold my breath. And I really wasn't like thinking like how I would think as a doula at this point. I was just following my body, which was really cool. And then her head, started to crown, and I yelled, "The baby's head is crowning!" And I was really excited. I was like smiling, and it was like a happy yell. It wasn't a painful yell or a scary yell. It was a joyful yell. From there, my body pushed the rest of her head out. And as that was happening, I had said, the head. And my doula asked if her head was fully out, and I like wasn't able to speak at that time because the stretching was like so intense. And so I like moved my leg a little bit so she could see. And at this point, I'm like kind of in a half lunge position. I'm like sitting on my right leg and have my left leg up. But the water was so murky at this point that you couldn't see through it just from like all the cervical change that had been happening and like the fluids leaking out. It was too murky to see much of anything. And then I felt the need to push after her head fully came out. I don't know if I had like stopped having a contraction at that point. I just felt like I needed to push. So I pushed just 4 times within a span of, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds. And then her whole body just like came out like slowly as I was pushing. And she was born, and I brought her up out of the water, and it was just like the most amazing, beautiful, overwhelming experience of my life. I held her and I cried, and I was just in utter disbelief of what had happened. I kept saying, my baby, it's a baby. I guess I was like, part of me had kind of forgotten that, like, at the end of all of this, I was going to get a baby out of it. So I was just like, it's a baby. I can't believe it. And we didn't know the gender at that point. And I didn't care to look immediately either. So we just enjoyed the moment for a few minutes, and I cried, and my husband was behind me and he was smiling and he was like praising God and thanking him, and I was just like so overwhelmed with the moment. It was so beautiful. It's truly like one of the best experiences of my life, and I would totally relive that over and over and over again. But yeah, we did that for a few minutes and just enjoyed our new baby, and then after a while, Elizabeth asked, "So does Shalom have a baby brother or a baby sister?" And then we decided to look and realize that it was a girl. And I think part of me kind of knew that it was a girl. I had been feeling at the end of my pregnancy that we'd have a girl, but also like when I was holding her, I just didn't feel boy parts, so I kind of knew that it was already a girl, but it was still an exciting moment. And I just couldn't believe that Shalom had a little sister and that he was a big brother. It was just, it was a fun moment learning the gender. It was fun.
Mm.
Um, so we hung out in the pool for a while, just enjoying our new baby, our new daughter, Eden is what we named her. After a while, I started to feel the contractions to get the placenta out, and those were not fun. At
Mm.
that point, I had like totally checked out. I was like, I gave birth. I'm done. It's over.
I
I
did
had
my
actually
job.
said at one point, I'm like, thank God it's over. And it was not over, in fact. And the contractions to get the placenta out were a lot stronger than I expected them to be. And that's not something that I had felt with my first because I had an epidural, so I wasn't prepared for what that would feel like. But anyways, they kept coming in intervals, just as like when I was in labor. I wouldn't say they were as painful, but they were definitely uncomfortable, and I was still feeling the pain in my back with each contraction. My midwife suggested, or my monitress, I'm sorry, suggested that like I try getting out of the pool because maybe that would help the placenta to be born sooner because some time was passing. It wasn't too long, but it was still like half an hour at that point when she finally made the suggestion to try getting out of the pool. And I did try, but when I stood up, my legs felt really weak and shaky, and I was like, nope, I have to sit back down. I can't stand. So a little while later, maybe like 10 minutes later, she gave me a tincture of some herbs. I'm not sure what it was.
It's probably Angelica.
I think it was either that or she makes a blend, too, of various herbs. So one of the two. But she gave me the tincture, and within 5 minutes, my placenta was born. That was an unusual feeling, an unusual sensation to feel my placenta being born. And it was also unusual that the contraction that the placenta was born, I like felt my body pushing it out, and I like my body like made me like grunt and like physically push my placenta out, which was an unusual feeling too. But then it came out, and it was a very thick placenta, which probably explains why it took a little while for it to come out. Shortly after the placenta was born, I felt good enough to get out of the pool. So my husband took Eden and the placenta to our room, and Ashley and Elizabeth helped me to get up out of the pool. They dried me off. They walked me to the room, got me laid down in bed. And from there, I looked at the placenta. We felt the cord. We could feel it pulsing. I couldn't feel it pulsing because my hands were like still shaking. from all of the hormones and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't feel it pulsing, but everyone else felt the cord still pulsing, and so we let it pulse for a while, and eventually it
Really?
stopped
Even though it
pulsing.
wasn't attached?
It did still pulse for a little bit, yeah.
I haven't heard of that. Wow. Must have been some meaty, mighty placenta.
It was pretty meaty. It wasn't very large, like circumference wise, but thickness,
It's like dense and thick.
it was a
Yeah.
dense placenta. So it still pulsed for a little bit after the placenta was born, which, by the way, took about 45 minutes. So not too long, but also not very quick either.
Yeah.
So after it stopped pulsing, I'd say probably around like the 1 hour mark since her birth, we decided to cut the cord. And I cut it this time since my husband cut it last time. And then after that, I latched my baby and we nursed for the first time. And I had forgotten how strong babies latch on. So that was a little shocking to me for a few seconds when I latched her. Then my birth team kind of cleaned up the mess. They cleaned up the birth pool, cleaned up all of like the blood trail that had like dripped down when we were walking from room to room. Got all the birth supplies packed away. After a while, I had gone up to go to the bathroom and, put on some clothes. Well, not really clothes, I guess my adult diaper and a nursing tank top. And my friend Autumn went and picked up some Indian barbecue for my husband and I to eat. Later that night, after our birth team, I guess they were kind of leaving. They were still there, kind of leaving at this time, but we had called our families, well, my family in Missouri, to let them know that they had a new granddaughter. And so that was a lot of fun getting to show them their granddaughter and introduce them to her. And also to tell my dad's side of the family what her full name was, which is Eden Colleen, because Colleen is the name of my great grandmother. It's a family name, and she passed away about 15 years ago. So it's just a nice sentiment to use her name. So I was really excited to share her name with them because we hadn't before the birth. But yeah, honey, do you want to add anything about the birth? Like the actual birth of Eden?
Yeah, I mean, it was awesome. It was awesome. I recommend for like the husbands or men who hear this, like I recommend home birth over hospital birth 100 times. Oh, it's so much better. I mean, you get to eat food whenever you want to. You don't have to wait to get discharged. You don't have to sleep on the hospital bed. You get to sleep in your own bed. And it's just so much more peaceful too. Another big thing is just like it was the one thing where I can actually help out with the birth. It wasn't something where like it was like at the hospital where I was just on standby. All I could do is just be present, just there. While during the home birth, I'm actually able to do something like hands on, like,
Yeah.
but I did feel I was able to be involved and help and participate. Like yeah, such again with hip squeezes, praying, holding her, helping her and getting positions in or out of the pool. Just it felt like I was able to do something. Again, with hospital births, I felt like I there wasn't really much I could do.
Yeah.
And the doula in me wants to jump in and say that dads definitely still play a role in hospital births. I think it's a lot harder though for dads to feel like they can like take the lead or take charge in a birth experience in the hospital because medical personnel are usually stepping in more frequently. But there is still a lot that dads can do to support moms in the hospital, even if they are having a medicated birth. So
Yeah.
that's just the doula in me who wants to point that out.
I get that.
But overall, like just the experience was just awesome. I can't wait to have another child again and do all that all over again.
Well, it's refreshing since she's only a few months old.
I know he wants Irish twins, but I told him no.
Oh, yeah.
I'm patient. I'm patient. I can wait. I can wait. Yeah.
We can wait a little bit longer.
Yeah. Every time every diaper change is like, all right, yeah, I can wait. I can wait.
You can
not
wait a
that
little bit longer.
Mhm.
I imagine your postpartum went better this time.
So much better.
Oh, she was so loving. And
She was so loving.
uh-huh.
I wasn't
It-
traumatized.
yeah, she wasn't traumatized. And sorry for like butting in here, but yeah, like that was like one big difference is like, oh, she loves me. She's saying sweet things. Her tone is just more gentle.
Mm.
She's at peace with everything.
Well, I was on the birth high. I'd heard moms talk about that before, but I didn't really understand what it meant until I experienced it. But like the first 3 weeks were like being in heaven for me. It was just amazing. I even that night that she was born, like I could not sleep that night because I was so excited and like just could not believe that we had such a wonderful birth experience. I think I slept like 1 or 2 hours that night. But yeah, the first few weeks, it was just incredible. And I was feeling all of the amazing hormones and I was bonding with her well. And I had seen how much he had shown up for me in the labor, which he hadn't in the one prior, which is not his fault whatsoever. Um, and just
Right.
even
It's
like,
that nurse's fault who wouldn't wake him
yeah.
up.
Yes. But yeah, it was just so much better. I will say that breastfeeding was a little more challenging this time because she had a pretty severe tie, a tongue tie that came like all the way up to the end of her tongue.
Mm.
But we did have that resolved when she was like 3.5 weeks old, and since then, nursing has been a lot better. It was just really painful initially. It has been blissful and blessed. Like those are the two words that come to my mind: blissful and blessed.
Yeah. And then also like our church was a big blessing too. Because again, just the big difference is the amount of support that we had
Hmm.
with this birth and the previous one or postpartum is that there, yeah, we had people bring food and take care of us and just asked if we needed anything, prayed over us. So yeah, that was another one that just helped out with postpartum. And also we had a lot of food saved. Of course.
Yes, we had meal prepped a lot, and there was a meal train set up. We didn't cook a single meal, I think, for the first month,
Nice.
just based on like what we had saved in the freezer and meals that people had brought us. It was a huge blessing. Our church was such a blessing to us during this postpartum period and continues to be week in and week out. We love our church. Um, and yet it's unfortunate that we didn't start going there sooner, I should say. We were going to a different church at the time our son was born, but
Yeah.
started going to this
Got
one
that.
once he was a couple months old. It has been a wonderful postpartum experience, and I would do it all over again. The home birth, even though it was intense, I would say painful. The transition contractions definitely painful, um, but the Lord helped me through it, and I truly feel like the only way I got through it is because of His strength and His goodness getting me through that labor. Like I don't feel any pride in that at all. I don't feel like I'm any more like equipped or that I know better now. Um, in the sense of like my doula work. Like I don't feel like I can go to my clients and say, "Oh, I had an unmedicated home birth, so I know how to support you better." Like I don't feel like that. I just feel like the only way I got through it is the Lord. And it's truly all the glory and honor is to him, not to myself at all.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I remembered another thing that totally does not have to do with postpartum, but it has to do with like healing from my son's birth. I feel like this is important and I would love to share it. So, less than a month before my daughter was born, it was Good Friday, right before Easter. And I was driving in the car with my son, and I was actually listening to your podcast, but I'm not sure how much of an influence it had on the thoughts that I had thereafter, just because it doesn't necessarily align with like the story that I was listening to. But I will say your podcast definitely helped contribute to these thoughts, or the lesson that I learned essentially. But out of nowhere, like the thought popped into my head that like it was a blessing and God was showing me his grace by not giving me the birth that I wanted with my son because it was rooted in my pride and my ability to do it on my own rather than being rooted in him. And that if I had gotten the birth that I wanted with my son and had a free birth at home, that I would be prideful about that. And it would almost be like something to brag about, like, oh, look what I did. But the Lord in a sense, saved me from being prideful in my birth experience. As I mentioned earlier, it was definitely a humbling birth experience. And this realization that I had brought a lot of peace to me about my birth experience, because beforehand, when I would reflect back on it, it was just something that I felt disappointment by, and that there was trauma associated with it, and I didn't know how to like resolve that. I didn't know how to come to peace or come to terms with the birth experience that I had. And I also, like, I, in a sense, felt bad for my son that that was his story. And I didn't want his birth story to be one of disappointment and trauma. So that realization, that knowledge that the Lord gave me, that he was showing me his grace by not giving me the birth that I want, brought a lot of peace and healing to me about that birth experience, and made me feel a lot more confident in being able to rely on the Lord and surrender my desires to him, my birth to him, walking into my daughter's birth. And even now, after all of it, after experiencing my daughter's birth, like, I have so much confidence now that the Lord is going to give us exactly what we need, even if it doesn't seem like something that we need in that time. And even if it seems like it's not good to us in that moment, because we don't fully understand the Lord's work. We don't have that capacity because we are not God. So sometimes it doesn't seem like he's doing a good thing, but he is, even if that means we have to walk through something traumatic and hard and for the sake of being sanctified. That's still God doing a good work, and it's still him blessing us in a way that we just don't understand. So I'm very thankful for that and how the Lord shifted my mindset about my son's birth and made me see it as a blessing that I did not get the free birth that I was hoping for.
That's wonderful. And I think that's something only the Lord can do. Like, I think if you didn't have faith in Jesus that you do, that you'd still be, walking around upset about your first birth and, kind of living in that bitterness. But instead, you get to walk in the freedom of Christ and his plans and his sovereignty. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I think both of my birth experiences serve as a reminder to me to reflect on God's goodness in the future, even in hard moments. Like, even if one day we do lose a child or a pregnancy, that this will serve as a reminder to fully trust the Lord and lean on him in that circumstance rather than not. And I'm not going to say that I absolutely will. Like, my birth experience has caused me to never doubt the Lord, because I'm human and I know there will definitely be times where I doubt and question the Lord. But I do hope and pray that this birth experience comes as a reminder to me that God is faithful. He is sovereign. He is the one who is in charge. He's the one who gets to decide what is happening in our births, in our lives, in so many aspects of our lives, and that it is better to trust him and that his ways are better than our ways.
Amen. Well, Miriam, thank you. And thank Balta. I know he's off with Eden. But thank you both for just taking the time to share your heart, to share your story, because I know others will be encouraged and inspired by everything that y'all have shared.
Thank you for allowing us this opportunity to chat with you and share our stories. I really appreciate all of your time and the work that you're doing on this podcast. It made such a huge impact for me in my pregnancy and shaping my mindset and helping me to surrender to the Lord. And I pray that that is what many other women experience as well.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can reach me at Surrendered Birth Services on Instagram, or email me at contact@surrenderedbirthservices.com. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting the follow button. Also, we'd love for you to leave a written review of the show so that more people's births and lives can be changed by the love of Jesus and the empowerment of accurate birth education. If you really enjoyed this episode in particular, please take a screenshot of it and post it to your Instagram story, tagging Surrendered Birth Services. If you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to fill out your interest form. Also, if you're interested in taking my childbirth classes, birth consultations, or having me as your birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to my website for online and in-person options. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice. So please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. We hope you have a great week. And remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands. I'm at the 6-month mark with pregnancy, and the bladder fills so quickly. And it was sometimes when the baby just shifts position, suddenly
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
oh, I'm so uncomfortable. I have to pee now.
I
So-
understand. In my first pregnancy, I did not have any issues with my bladder, and I didn't have to get up in the middle of the night to go pee, and never had any
Wow.
leaks. And I was so blessed, and I was like, wow, I don't understand why this is such a struggle for other women. And then I had my second, and before I even got a positive test, I was getting up to pee in the middle of the night, which is not like me, and that has continued throughout postpartum. And there are other things that I cannot do. Like I realized the other day that I cannot hop, or else I will pee my pants. So
I
no
can't get
hopping
on a
with my 2-year-old.
trampoline.
No.
Those days are over.